This is Matt Renner reporting from Winter Soldier in Silver Spring, Maryland. Jason Hurd served with the Tennessee National Guard in Iraq from November 2004 to November 2005. At the conference, he testified about his experiences with the military rules of engagement.
One of the observation points that overlooked the Tigris River looked out at the old Republican Guard barracks, which were across the river. And there was one of those buildings that was sort of dilapidated. However, we knew that squatters had taken this building over, and we actually used to make jokes that this place looked like a crack house and that they were running drugs out of there. We had no evidence of that. It was just joking. One day, Iraqi police got into an exchange of gunfire with some unknown individuals around that building. Some of the stray rounds came across the Tigris River and hit the shield of one of our Hummers. The gunner atop that Hummer decided to open fire with his .50 caliber machine gun into that building. He expended about a case and a half of ammunition. And I'm no weapons expert. I'm a medic. But I talked to some of my colleagues just the other night, and to put this into perspective for you all, each case of .50 cal ammunition holds about 150 rounds. A case and a half is well over 200 rounds. Over 200 rounds of .50 caliber ammunition could take out just about every single person in this room. We fired indiscriminately and unnecessarily at this building. We never got a body count. We never got a casualty count afterwards. Another unit came through and swept up that mess. Ladies and gentlemen, things like that happen every day in Iraq. We react out of fear. Fear for our lives, and we cause complete and utter destruction.
Jason, thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you.
I want to talk to you about what the rules of engagement are and what their purpose is.
The rules of engagement are rules that are set up by the leadership in the military. Their purpose is to, one, protect soldiers and servicemen. So it gives you the criteria that allows you to engage hostile fire or threats or danger. And it's also supposed to be there to protect other people from you firing at them. So they're very strict guidelines, and they tend to get stricter as a war or an occupation moves on. So at first, for the initial invasion, they started out very loose because they didn't know what they were going to encounter. So it involved things like free fire zones where everything was considered a threat. By the time I made it to Iraq in 2004, they were a bit more strict. For instance, you had to have positive identification before you could engage a threat. You were supposed to only use deadly force when necessary. So if you perceived a threat, you needed to try to use other means to get away from that threat before you engaged it. So you had these things called levels of aggression that they taught you. And so if you have a perceived threat, your first action should be to try to get it away using hand and arm signals. So stop, move back, whatever. Next is to raise your weapon. If that doesn't stop the threat, you pull your selector switch off of safe and fire a warning shot. If that doesn't work, you continue on through these levels, and if it's a car, you walk bullets up the hood of the car, and your last resort is to kill the person driving it.
Your unit was tasked with guarding an explosive ordnance disposal team, which is a high-profile target because they're the ones that are actually dismantling car bombs. During this time, you actually had to make a split-second decision whether to fire your weapon into a car that was approaching you. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, that instance actually happened while we were on a dismounted patrol through the Kindy Street neighborhood, which is a neighborhood right outside the green zone. We were on foot walking down a street, and as the medic, I always stay at the rear of the formation with the platoon sergeant, so in case anything happens up front, I can respond. And going in line with that 50-meter perimeter around yourselves at all times, if a car approaches us, we're to wave it off down a side street or get it to stop or something. And so the individuals up front waved the car off down a side street. By the time I made it up to that street, this car had turned around and was coming back towards us because there was a concrete T-barrier at the other end of the street blocking it. And so I went through my levels of aggression. The first thing I did was I held up my hand trying to get it to stop. The car actually sped up. And so in my mind, this is all split second. I was thinking, oh gosh, this is a threat. This is someone who's trying to harm us. So I actually did something that you're not supposed to do. I took my hands completely off my weapon and began jumping up and down, waving my hands, trying to get this car to see me and to stop. And it kept coming. So I raised my weapon, and it kept coming. And I pulled the selector switch off of safe and was applying pressure to my trigger, getting ready to fire at it. Some guy randomly and out of the blue just came off the side of the road and flagged this car down and got it to pull over to the side.
An Iraqi civilian?
An Iraqi civilian. He went around to the driver's side door and opened it up, and out pops an 80-year-old woman.
And who was that woman? Was she a member of the community?
I was told that she was a highly respected woman in the community. I was also told that she was fairly blind and could not see. So that's the reason why she didn't stop. I was in desert-colored camouflage with a desert-colored background behind me.
What kind of pressure is there when you're faced with making these split-second decisions or always on guard? How does that affect you personally?
Well, the odd thing is that you never deal with these things in the moment. The Army trains you to use what they call muscle memory, and all that means is they train you so often and repetitively on the same tasks over and over that it becomes second nature to you.
It becomes reflexive.
Exactly. And so in the moment, you're actually not thinking. That's why a lot of soldiers, when they're talking about their combat experience, there are gaps. Because when you're using your muscle memory, you're not actively thinking. It's something subconscious that is doing the work. You don't have time to reflect on it until you get done with the mission, and that can be, at the end of the day, or it can be 2 years later that you start reflecting on it.
How have these experiences affected you since you've been back from Iraq?
I have had major depression since I returned from Iraq 2 years ago, and sometimes I have flashbacks about that woman. Sometimes I have flashbacks about other things I witnessed in Iraq, and it causes me a lot of anxiety and a lot of guilt. And speaking out is actually my own way of dealing with that guilt.
Have you found that having peer-to-peer interaction about this kind of stuff helps?
It does, because up until now, I've not been able to meet a lot of these people from IVAW face-to-face. And I remember yesterday when I walked in to the National Labor College here, I saw all of these veterans everywhere, and they were all laughing and hugging and shaking hands and telling each other they loved each other. And once again, I've never met these people, but almost immediately they took me in and said, "Hey, you're one of our brothers. You're here doing the same thing that we are, and we're here to support you." It makes a tremendous difference, because for the last 2 years I've been speaking out. I've been doing it generally on my own. And I've had some success trying to get my point across to people in the South, but they still can't relate in the way that a veteran does.
What are your goals for testifying here at Winter Soldier?
One, I hope that service members listen and tune in, if they're not here, to what is being said. I hope that they realize that there are other service members out there who may feel the way they do. I would say there are very good chances there are a lot of service members out there who are against this war, but they don't feel like they have the opportunity to speak out because there are legal repercussions against them. In the military, you have an abbreviated version of freedom of speech, and they are afraid what might happen to them. I hope that they know there are other people here to support them and to be there for them. And we want to bring the troops home. We care about our soldiers and servicemen deeply. On top of that, I hope that the American public watches this and they see these first-hand eyewitness accounts of what is the reality in Iraq. And I hope they say, "Wow, I never got that from the mainstream media. Wow, I've never heard these things before, but this is from the people who actually were fighting the war." On top of that, our testifiers have been verified. Their records have been verified. They've provided photographs and video. And if anything is ever on the record, this definitely is. So I hope people realize that this is not an effort to indict soldiers, but it's an effort to be truthful, and so that can hopefully shape future policy.
Thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you.
From Winter Soldier, this is Matt Renner, reporting for TruthOut.org.